I just want to say I am absolutely delighted to be here today and thank the Long COVID Families Group for their wonderful work on this presentation. And those of you who are here or who are going to see this recorded later. So I'm going to share my screen and get going. Okay. Okay, so as Gretchen said, the topic is protecting children from COVID-19 in schools with ventilation and masks. So as I'm sure everybody knows at this point, COVID-19 virus is airborne and people are infected primarily, almost totally, by inhaling virus from other people. That means protecting children requires minimizing viruses in the air in the school. So there's three types of protections that we can do this with. And the two most important are the topic of this talk, ventilations and masks. Distance can help some, but without ventilation and masks, it's actually minimal or completely negligible, certainly not enough. So this diagram will elaborate a little bit more on how COVID-19 spreads in the air. When somebody coughs, sneezes, screams, or sings, they emit larger particles that come from the tubes coming down from the nose down to the lungs with a lot of mucus. So you get big, heavy particles, and they tend to travel about 6 feet under most conditions before they fall to the ground. And they fall just by gravity because they're heavy. But much smaller particles come from talking or just from breathing. And we call those aerosols. And you can see the small light ones in the picture traveling all the way towards another person, all the way through the room. These spread widely, and without ventilation, they can stay in the air for hours. They just hang there because they're so light. One way to think of it is like cigarette smoke. If you have cigarette smoke in a room that doesn't have airflow going through it, it's just going to spread out in the air and stay. And it's exactly what the aerosols do. So how do we get rid of them? Well, ventilation is a big one. So we'll look at that a little more closely. So ventilation removes pollutants in two ways. It dilutes them with fresh air, virus or other pollutants, and it can filter pollutants from the air. And we'll talk a little bit about both methods. Schools tend to have one or more of these three types of ventilation, if they have any ventilation. Some have none. Windows, if they open, do provide fresh air and can reduce the virus under some conditions. An HVAC system, or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, can be very helpful, but my understanding is that very few schools actually have them or have functional ones going to the classrooms. More common in the urban schools, at least where I am near Philly, the schools have old unit ventilators in each classroom. And they're a single unit in the classroom that's really aimed at heating and cooling and might filter a teeny weeny bit, but not enough. So we'll talk about we'll talk about windows and unit ventilators, and I might skip HVAC mostly because they're so uncommon in schools. So first, looking at windows, as I said, they help to dilute the virus and any other pollutants with fresh air if they open, of course. But they do have serious limitations. One, there's no filtration in them. They obviously, air just coming in and out is not filtered by anything. They're dependent on weather, especially wind. The wind might be blowing air into the room, or it might be sucking it out, or more likely it's not really doing anything because it's going along the building. And whether or not, or how much air comes in or goes out of the room through windows is totally unpredictable and constantly changing. Second, third, if they're only in one wall, which I think is the most common configuration in schools, all the windows on one wall, then there's no cross ventilation or ventilation blowing across the room from one wall to another. And lastly, the outdoor air may be polluted. So or it might be too warm or cool, so you have to close the windows. This is a really important thing lately because of wildfire smoke, which forces you to close the windows in some parts of the country. Okay. If you do have windows and they open, these diagrams will suggest how the configuration of the windows matters. Think of each little blue house as actually a blue classroom. And starting from the left, the first one says good. It really should say pretty good because it's not great. But just one window open or windows in one wall, you can see from the little yellow arrow that air will come in and it will go out the same window. And depending on wind or whatever, it might not circulate hardly at all in the room. You can see it just do a U-turn and go back out. So that's not really helping the room much. A little bit better is if the windows are on different walls, and on this second blue classroom, they're on adjacent walls, and the air will come in one, and it might circulate a teeny bit before it's drawn out the other, or it might stay predominantly in the corner between those windows. You can see by the small yellow thickening line between them, that's supposed to be the circulation in the room. Just a little bit more than with one window. The third one shows two windows on opposite walls, and that's, it says best. It's really second best. And you can see the air being drawn all the way across the room by the second window allows more circulation, and that's indicated in the drawing, a little oddly, by a larger yellow blob of air that's able to move around the room a bit. And the best one on the far right is windows that are not lined up, that are on opposite sides of the room, but one's towards the left, one's towards the right. So the air has to take a crooked path across the room, and that makes it spread out more, circulate in the room. And I think that drawing's a little hard to read, so I found this other one, put it below that drawing, showing an aerial view, shows the crooked path more clearly. And you can see those little blue stars around the line suggest that that might be where the air circulation arrows would really go. So I don't know how many classrooms would have a thing like that, an arrangement like that, but it's good if they do. Another thing is fans and windows. Here's some don'ts and do's. The big don't is something that sort of by common sense we think to do, and you see this very commonly, is to put an intake fan, drawing the air in one window and an exhaust fan in the other, which just means turning them opposite ways, one fan to blow in and one fan to blow out. But it doesn't work well, as what can often happen is that the air, the lawnmower guy, you will only be a minute, the air coming in will be seduced by the air going out and just tend to flow right along that wall between the windows. And we call that short circuiting. So it'll just go from more from one fan to the other and not circulate so much into the room. The other don't is having a small fan in a big window, or in fact, even a big fan in a big window. If there's space around the fan, that will cause a different kind of short circuiting under some conditions, where the air will come in and then just go right back out again around the fan. Okay, so if you're using fans like a big box fan, a square fan in a big square rectangular window, that's good, but you should put like a cardboard mantle around it. You can put together fairly easily to make sure that the whole window area is enclosed, and then the fan will blow right back out again. The air coming in will blow right back out. So the suggestion down below, the do, is no matter which walls have windows, just use an exhaust fan and allow other open windows to draw the air in naturally from wherever they are. One last thing about pedestal fans or standing fans in a room. A lot of people like to have them. They can make a nice breeze, circulate the air well in the room and make it more comfortable. But the thing you have to watch for when you have COVID, where people are the source of the virus, if there's anyone infected in the room unmasked, you don't want to blow the air from one person's breathing zone or their face to another person's face for obvious reasons. So you have to pay attention to where the fan is placed and where the airflow, you could picture the arrows like in some of the diagrams, where those arrows are going to blow the air, and make sure they're not doing that, blowing it from one person to another. The HVAC system, I'm just going to touch on really quick. And this is a diagram of one. And the main thing, you can't see my pointer, right? Is that right? You can't see my cursor?
We can. I can see your cursor.
Oh, you can?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That makes it so much easier. Okay. So what an HVAC generally is, it has somewhere, usually on the roof or in a service unit near the roof, a big box. And in the box is a few things. There's a general dust filter here for the air coming in. Then this was a bigger filter, and then some heater and cooling or both elements. And then the round thing is the fan. So the air comes in on the left, goes through the filter and the air heat and cool, and then the fan blows it out. Oops, didn't mean to move that. Blows it out the supply duct. That supply duct will branch and go to everywhere in the school that it's going to feed to, ideally to every classroom. The other end of the fan is really important because the question is, where is the air coming from that comes into that box? Spread it back out. Okay, this one shows the duct on the top is labeled return air, and that means return air from all the rooms that received air from this unit. So it's being recirculated back into the fan. Now, if we have pollutants like COVID in there that aren't necessarily caught by the filters in these units, which they usually are not, then that recirculated air is going to have COVID in it, and it's going to go back and get recirculated to the whole school. The lower duct here, with the lighter color or the reddish color, is fresh air. And this diagram shows by the size of the arrows and the size of the ducts that return air coming in is greater volume than fresh air coming in. And that's the opposite of what we want with COVID. We want to maximize the fresh air and minimize the recirculated air. Ideally, it would be 100% fresh air, but that never happens because then they have to cool and heat it so much and break the budget. So that's basically how an HVAC system functions. Okay, I'm going to skip the weeds on this issue and just go to the common asks. The most important asks, if you have an HVAC system and you want to make sure things are functioning maximally for COVID, these would be the asks. The most possible, maximum possible outside air, the best filters the system can handle, and I'm not going to go into here what MERV is. The best filter it can handle is a function of the fan, because the better the filter, the finer the filter, the more work it takes for the fan to blow air through it. So if the fan is not the fan is not designed to blow through a HEPA filter, the best filter you can get, which we'll talk about in a minute, then you can't put that in. So you want to get the best possible filter the system can handle, but that's not necessarily a great filter. You want to be sure it operates all day and it's not turned off and on by some measurement device like a CO2 meter or by temperature. And finally, you want to demand regular documented inspection and maintenance. Okay. If anybody has questions about HVAC, I know this is really, really, really brief. I'll have a question period at the end. And also, I'm making the paper I wrote about this, which is kind of a manual for workers for teachers and parents and community, how to find what you need in your school, how to figure out what you need in your school and what to demand. And it'll go into much more detail. So the third one, we did windows and briefly HVAC. And the third kind of ventilation common in schools is called unit ventilators, which means basically one ventilator per classroom. And these are just examples of two. On the one on the left, you can see there's a sort of dark space under it, and that's the return air coming from the room going back into this thing. There's a fan in it which will blow it up, and it'll come out the top in this model. Sometimes one of the problems is that people put stuff on top of them and block that. This model is more recent and better in that it has the air coming out here so that whatever you put on top isn't going to block that. But the other problem the big one you can't see in the picture is there's supposed to be outside air coming in the back. And there's fresh air louvers to let it in. but not if there's no hole in the outside wall. And very often these are installed without cutting through the wall, or there's a hole in the wall for the outside air, but the louvers are closed. In either case, you get no outside air. And so all you have is it's recirculating air coming in the bottom and going out the top. It's basically not doing it. Okay, here's a diagram of it. On the left is the outside wall of the school. And these are louvers which are happily open, fresh air louvers. And this arrow going in shows outside air coming in. And then it goes through a little filter. And these are crummy little filters that are just for gross dust to protect the fan, really, not anywhere near, particles thousands of times bigger than COVID aerosols. And then the fan will blow the air here through a heating or cooling thing and then out. So that, and then back in the bottom, as we saw in the picture of the unit, the return air comes in the bottom. So the outside air and the return air mix and go up through the fan and out. Okay. Problems, I think I've mentioned them all. They often have little or no fresh air coming in. The filters are only for gross dust. They don't have enough airflow. Usually they have about a maximum of 1/3 of what's needed for COVID. And materials on the top can block circulation. There's a lot of problems with that. And I know from experience too, often, I didn't mention this in the slide too, but often the insides of it are filthy. They don't bother to clean the louvers, either set the return air or the outside air louvers. And so the air coming through is full of allergens and dirt, and maybe dead insects and whatever, and can cause respiratory problems. So here's one more diagram. Up here is a diagrammatic thing of the flow from the univent, and it's showing the arrows. Most of them are not going that far because the fan isn't powerful enough. A few arrows manage to circulate in the room. So there's not enough airflow to do too much good. They're primarily a heater and cooling unit. This one just shows junk on the top, covering up. You can sort of see the little black in there, covering up where the airflow should be coming out. A little bit here is clear. And this one shows the filter, which you can get an idea is the kind you can buy at Home Depot or some store that is just a gross dust filter. So with all those three kinds of ventilation that schools usually have, windows, univents, or HVAC, or that they usually don't have operative systems or adequate ones, what do? Here's what we do. First priority in most cases is going to be trying to get HEPA filtered air purifying units in every classroom. And in the next slide, I'll tell you what HEPA means if you're not familiar. But before we do, I just want you to notice in the picture that the contaminated air, the COVID in it, comes in one side of the unit, and then it comes out clean. In this model, it comes out on the other side through that filter. Other models, it comes out the top. Those are basically the only two configurations that I've seen anyway of HEPA filtered units. Okay, so what's HEPA mean? HEPA filters are really fine filters that can capture very tiny particles. We're talking like a millionth of a meter size particles. And that includes aerosols, including COVID aerosols. The word stands for high efficiency particulate air, which is another way of saying very fine filter. So that's what we want, HEPA filters. Okay, there's a few things to consider if you're ever in the stage of your struggle for ventilation where you're choosing what air purification units to get. Here are a few considerations. The first one is the capacity. The goal by all of the big air and health organizations now and ventilation organizations all agree now that for COVID bioaerosols, COVID or other virus particles, we need 6 air changes per hour. An air change is the air delivered in the volume of the room. For example, if the classroom has 1,000 cubic feet, and that's the volume, you need 6,000 cubic feet of filtered air or fresh air every hour. But in the case of these, it's filtered air because we're talking about a HEPA filtered unit. So you need to know the volume of the room and the capacity of the thing, the unit, to figure out if it's going to be giving you 6 air changes per hour. And it might be that each room requires more than one. In fact, it would be very odd to have only one. Of course, it's going to be a budget consideration how many you have. Left out one. The second consideration is noise. It's a real problem, practical problem. Is you usually have 3 speeds, and very often the high speed is really loud. And what happens? Teachers end up turning them off because they don't want to shout over them. So the whole struggle of a filtered air purifier comes to nothing if we don't have it on. So ideally, one looks for the quietest model, one where the high speed can be tolerated. And if not, if it's going to be used on medium speed, then your capacity figuring, your little math you have to do, is going to have to be taking into account the airflow, the air capacity at medium speed. So you need to figure out how much capacity each one will give you at the speed you're actually going to be using it. And from a health point of view, the noise should be less than 40 decibels. You just have to find out from the manufacturer, if they tell you that, how loud they are. So it's a very important practical consideration. The last thing and the hardest one to talk about is where do you put them in the room? And unfortunately, every room is different in terms of airflow patterns and things, mobile blackboards or whatever objects are in the room affecting the airflow in the room. So there's no general rule to say, but there's a few things to consider. And I think the basic thing is to always keep in mind visualizing the airflow. Visualize arrows around the room. Where's the air going? What's blocking it? So you can kind of have an idea of the airflow, and you want to take that into account in these ways. In most cases, you want to keep the windows and the doors closed because they're going to provide a completely unpredictable and varying airflow in the room. And any way that you place the filters is going to have it need to be moving them around all the time. Like when the air comes in from the window, whoops, get the HEPA filter away from the window. You don't want to clean the window with clean air. And so if you have more than one, ideally, then having them around the room, scattered in as close to some kind of circular type pattern, is best. And keeping them a few feet off the floor, if practical, is really good, because just think about all the students are sitting there at their desks or standing around, and their face is 3 to 5 feet from the floor. So you want to generate a flow of clean air in that altitude range where their faces are. So lifting these things up off the floor, if they're not 3 or 4 feet high already, and blowing it out the top, that may be good. But you want to think about, again, where are those arrows? Where's that air going? And in thinking of the arrows, if you have 2 units, you want to make sure they don't interfere with each other. For example, you wouldn't want to have them on opposite sides of a room pointing at each other, blowing the air at each other, because they'll kind of sabotage each other's flow. Better to have them both pointed in the same direction through the room. Okay, whoops. And a couple of don'ts is don't do anything that's going to obstruct either the inlet where the air comes in or the outlet where the air comes out of the unit. So they should be at least 1 or 2 feet from walls or objects. They should never be under a table or in a corner, and they should never be near an open door or window. So you avoid just cleaning already clean air. Okay. So it's not always obvious. This picture raises questions to me. Is this 1 unit enough in this room? And is it well placed? And we can't answer these because we don't have enough information, but it's how you should be thinking about it. Like, is that unit too far away from those students? And why is it not in the middle? Why is it facing one row where the guy is and not this row where the woman is? Why isn't it in the middle? I don't know what their considerations were in this room, but those are the kind of questions you should be asking to yourself. Move it around, thinking arrows, thinking airflow. Okay, and this is just to illustrate what one classroom did. This was an experiment, actually. This was a classroom, and you can see all these things are rows of desks. Along this wall on the top of the picture are all windows, and they're all closed. And down here is a door, and it's closed. And so there's no ventilation in the room except for HEPA units. The green circles are the HEPA units. And they put those on. I have no other information about capacity or anything, but they did find in this particular experiment with this room and these units that 90% of all particles were cleared from everywhere in the room within 30 minutes. Okay, we don't usually have research that's going to tell us that, but you can see they're scattered around the room, which is good. If you only had two, my best bet would be to place them here and here, or maybe on the diagonal here and here or here. It just depends. You have to kind of picture the airflow, try to get the air through the room as much as possible. And there's no easy answer. It's just your best thoughts on airflow. And this is a little pop quiz if anybody wants to say anything. What's good in this setup and how could it be improved? Does anybody want to say what is good of the protections available here?
So this is Gretchen. I don't think the audience can answer in the webinar, but I can take a shot if you want.
Sure. I'll answer my own question.
So the placing of the HEPA filter looks like it's too close to the wall, and it's just not. It looks like it should be placed in a more central part of the classroom, for one thing.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And I'm not sure if this is accurate based on, because I've been taking notes as I'm watching, but having the windows open and also running the HEPA filter is counterproductive. Is that right?
Yep. Okay. Usually. And what about the two windows?
Oh, they're just basically switching air out, like it's just pulling the fresh air right back outside.
Yeah, because they have two fans, an intake fan here and an exhaust fan here, and they're showing arrows going this way, but more likely what would happen is they'd go this way. Yeah. Gotcha. The good thing though, you see anything good in the room?
I mean, the desks are spaced apart. There are, you know, there is the exhaust fan and the HEPA filter, even if they're not in the exact right place, but.
Right. And they're wearing masks too.
Well, yes.
So it looks like they're wearing cloth masks, but can't really say. The ones in the back are white. You can't really see anything. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So that's how you want to be thinking, looking at the configuration. What would be better? Shut these fans off probably and move the HEPA to a more central place. Yeah. Okay. So the paper I'm making available to you all in the resources that Megan's going to be putting together will have much more detail on ventilation and HVACs and a whole sort of manual on how to proceed in working on getting ventilation in the school. Okay, so we're not going to do question and answer, right, Gretchen?
Yeah, when you are done, is this your last slide?
It's the last slide on ventilation, and I have a short presentation on masks.
Okay, so if you want to go ahead and do the mask presentation, and then we will just, we'll take over the screen and we'll both be on the screen and we can do a question and answer session.
Okay, or is there a chat? People could write in the chat too.
Yeah, if people want to write in, there's a Q&A at the bottom of the screen. If people want to write questions.
Oh yeah, that would be good.
And then as well.
I can't
and then
see
I have a list of questions that our community has been sending us the last few days. So
maybe I can answer some. We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll move ahead to masks. This one's much shorter, it's less techy. Okay, I think this will be obvious why we need them, because even if you have gotten good ventilation, lots of air purifying units, an infected student without a mask can still infect nearby students, and they can affect their families. So we need all the layers of protection possible. One thing that people, I think, forget all the time or don't know is students or teachers may not know they're infected. 40% in many studies, the average is 40% of infected people have no symptoms. And there's a new study, it's the small one, it's not peer reviewed yet, but 50% may be asymptomatic with Omicron. So if you have people if their choice of wearing a mask is based on whether they have symptoms, that doesn't cut it, because almost half or even half of them won't have symptoms when they are infected. So masks are really important. So I'm going to dive right into the types of masks. The best ones from a filtering point of view are N95s. And they're more than masks. They're actually respirators. And a respirator is a mask that has the ability to create an airtight seal with the face, which other masks don't. Okay, so they do that. They have very high quality filter material like a HEPA filter. And the reason they can get the tight seal is because they have two straps, and I'm sure you've all seen them, which can hold the mask much tighter against your face than ear loops can. They come in several shapes, so they fit many kinds of faces. And they're really important and good for people who have special vulnerabilities or medical conditions. Either they can't be vaxxed, or they're immunocompromised, or some other reason, including kids who need extra protection. The main problem with them is they can be hard to breathe through. I personally find them hard to breathe through. I have a little bit of compromised lungs. So I have them, but I really hardly ever wear them. So what else is good? Oh, still on them, sorry. They have the tight seal because of the two straps. If they're worn correctly, which means basically one strap above the ear and one below the ears. And then they come in these different styles, this sort of three-part style, the cup-shaped style and the duckbill style. There might be some other ones too. So the next best, which are probably the most useful for what we're talking about, which is daily moderate exposures or everyday moderate exposures. They also have good tested filter material. And they tend to fit well. They're well designed, and they fit the face without gaps. And not necessarily airtight, but without gaps. So you're getting much less air coming around the edges than you would with other kinds of masks. And many people, including myself, find them comfortable and easier to breathe through than N95s. And for our purposes, they come in children's sizes. And they come in colors and patterns, which just might appeal to some kids. And you can see some absolutely gorgeous kids with their masks. These two are N95s. And they all have more or less the same shape with the central crease. And the KF94s, there's different models, but they're all designed to be sort of boxy. They come out at the top, over the nose part, then down, and then they have another facet going back. And the advantage is that they barely touch your mouth, so when you breathe. If they're fitting well, they might touch a little bit. I find when I breathe in through it, it sucks it in a little bit, and it might touch my mouth, but just a little. So they're real comfortable because you've got like an air pocket around you. Okay, so those N95s are the best. The KN95 and KF94 are the next best. Good is to have a combination of a cloth mask over a surgical mask, because dropping first to surgical masks, they have a good filter material, but they have such a gap at the cheeks. I mean, some people are able to get around it by knotting the thing, but it doesn't work on everybody's face. That usually about 25% of the air breathed in or out leaks. So they're really not a useful mask at all by themselves. Why they're allowed in hospitals is beyond me. But better than that, going back up again, is the cloth mask over the surgical mask, because the surgical mask is a good filter, and the cloth mask, if it fits properly, may hold down the gaps on the side. Cloth masks by themselves really are not useful for COVID because aerosols go right through. So which mask is best for your child? The best mask is the one that fits snugly against the face and is comfortable. Okay, it's not a technical issue. This mask is wearable. It fits well and you're comfortable in it, then that's the right mask. So my suggestion to find them is to start with ordering masks in small quantities and try a couple styles till you find the best one. That's expensive, but my thought is that people could work in groups and buy a handful of styles, pooling the cost, and then try the different styles. So that's one thought. But I think the next talk, or talk and a half, talk after me, after the next one, is going to address how to get them. This is really important too. Doesn't matter how you wear them. Of course, if it's under the nose, it offers no protection. I have seen countless pictures of kids wearing cloth masks under the nose. They may as well not wear a mask. It's pointless. Both that it's cloth and that it's under the nose. And then if you don't press the nose piece to your face, you'll have gaps next to your nose. And even the way you do it, you should press it from top to bottom. Because if you press it from bottom to top, you squeeze it to a point and you create a little gap above the bridge of your nose. Most people don't pay attention. In N95s, the straps should be on correctly. And in any case, follow the manufacturer's instruction. They tell you exactly how to put it on, but you do have to read it. Okay. Another important practical issue is how long can you wear it? You don't have to throw them out every day. You can reuse them for many, many hours before discarding. You only need to discard if the mask is visibly stained, soiled, frayed, wet, or the straps are loose. Then you should toss it. You should not wash them. That's something a lot of people don't realize. Washing damages the filter material. So, and don't spray them with disinfectant. A friend of mine just told me she did that. I'm just about free. Because disinfectants are toxic, and you're putting them on the mask and breathing them in. That's a real no-no. Okay, here's another really practical, serious problem. Most of the masks on the internet are fake, which means they're not a tested filter material. So how can you tell? Nearly all N95s have head straps. So if you see one with ear loops, it's probably fake. And you'll notice if you start looking up N95s on the internet, most of them have ear loops. They're fake. So the way you tell is simply you look at the markings on them. If they are N95s and they're approved by NIOSH, which is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and they are the group, the government group that is supposed to test masks, they have to have this information, a testing and certification, or a TC approval number, and it will be like this, TC and then blah, blah. I just made up those digits, but it'll have like digits and numbers in the dash, be in that form. That should be printed on the mask, as well as the part number, N95, NIOSH, and a lot number. So there's like 5 things that should be printed on the mask. Okay. This information is in a PCDC mask sheet that I wrote most of, and you'll find it in the reference materials. And the same with this. The same thing goes with KN95s. They're made in China, and KF94s are made in Korea. They're not NIOSH approved because NIOSH doesn't approve masks made in other countries, or with the made to the standards of other countries. So they're tested in China or Korea. I don't have detailed information if those tests are as rigorous as NIOSH's tests, but apparently people who have tested them here independently have been satisfied that they are. And to tell you how to read them, it's the same sort of thing, and where to get them, it's the same sort of thing. You need to see what's either for the Korean ones, KF94s, the material is printed on the package, and with the KN95s, it's printed on the respirator, like with our American ones, on the mask. So you would go to this fact sheet called, or info sheet called Mask Up at the PCDC website. You go to the website, you click on resources, you click on info sheets, and the Mask Up one is the first one that comes up.